It's great to be back here and be with all of you. I was glad to get this opportunity to stop in the Bay Area before going back to the village. And it's an interesting time to come back too. I know that monetarily the situation here in the Bay Area is not easy, and it's getting more and more so in other parts of the country. We are on the cusp of a great change, I feel. And I thought I might talk a little bit about our present and future directions, what they mean, and what we can do about them. Because, as you know, I just finished, in fact, just the day before I left Assisi, I finished the book, God is for Everyone, which is really, it may seem presumptuous, but it isn't at all, because I've written it in Master's name, and people might think, well, why on earth would you write a book in his name? The preface of the book explains why, but you may not all know the reasons why, so I'll try to tell you a little bit. Back in 1955, Laurie Pratt, who was the chief editor of Yogananda's, she and I used to talk on the phone, and she said to me, I'm thinking of dropping the publication, Science of Religion. And I said, well, what on earth for? That's one of the most important books Master wrote. And she answered me, to my amazement, he didn't even write it. And I said, well, then who did? She said, Dear Ananda, who was a disciple of his from the early years. And I didn't know where to put that one, but I said that this is really Master's central message. It's what we teach, what he taught all his life. And I didn't know what to do with that. Fortunately, my distress at the very thought of suspending that publication influenced her to not go ahead with that suspension. But years later, in 1961 in India, I was talking with Swami Satyananda, who was a companion and a disciple, but again, not awfully. And so I sort of say companion first. Anyway, he had been one of the companions of Master, along with Dhirananda, when they were young men together in Calcutta. And he told me that when Master came back from Japan, and you know the story because you've read it in Autobiography of a Yogi, that he came back with this idea, inspiration for how he would be able to spread his mission in the world. And he wrote his ideas down. Well, in those days he didn't know English really very well at all. And so he wrote his outline in Bengali. And he asked Dhirananda if he would write them out in booklet form in English. Dhirananda was a scholar and had an MA and knew English much better. And this was in order to have something to present to the crowd when he came to Boston in 1920. So the book itself was published in India just before Master came. Well, what I understood from this story is that it was still Master's book. The author of a book is the one who has the ideas. But it's a very common practice for authors who don't know how to express themselves well in written form, and in Master's case the problem was that he didn't know the English language well, to have a ghostwriter. So Dhirananda was a ghostwriter. And given that, I could accept that it was Dhirananda who wrote it, but it was certainly Master who wrote it behind the scenes because it was his ideas. Well, I just left it at that, and I'd always liked the book, but not for the way it was written. I liked it for the contents. I used to make that backbone, you might say, of anything that I taught, and as Master did. Well, anyway, a year ago, I was in New York, and Sean told me that he was thinking of republishing The Science of Religion. It had come on to into the public domain, and he thought it was a good thing for us to promote. And I thought, well, let me look at it. And so again, I reread it. I hadn't read it for quite a while. And it was quite a surprise to me to see how badly it was written. It was written very, as Tara said, Laurie said, it was very pompous, pedantic, scholarly, sounded like a scholarly dissertation. But it wasn't something that draws you in and explains why this very important book has always been one of Master's poorest sellers. But I thought, well, would it be too presumptuous to ghostwrite it again? And with that thought in mind, I thought, well, what I'll do is, I know English well. Dear Ananda was Bengali. I can make the language more attractive and perhaps draw a larger audience to this very important message. And so I thought to keep all the same ideas, the same structure, the same flow, everything, but just to word the phrases a little better so that it would flow better, and so on. And this was my expectation. I sat down without even planning the book, because I figured the plan is there. And I would just follow sentence by sentence and make it more readable. Well, you can understand that, I'm sure. It would be the normal thing to expect. As I got into it, I found that it didn't work. I went quite a distance into it, and it was readable and more interesting and so on. But the first thing that hit me was that he kept making an opposition between pain and happiness. And I thought, well, I've been in physical pain many times and been perfectly happy. Those are not opposites. Pain and pleasure are opposites. Suffering and happiness are opposites, but not pain and happiness. I thought, well, Master wouldn't have made that mistake. And I know Bengali somewhat, and I realized Master certainly, writing in Bengali, would have used the word dukkha. Dukkha, when you put it into English, translates as either pain, sorrow, or suffering. And he chose pain, but it didn't fit as an opposite to sukha, which is happiness. And so I realized I really needed to rethink this thing again. Then there were more and more, it was coming to my mind that the illustrations he used were not ones Master would use, not ones I ever heard Master use. They didn't really fit. I thought this guy's a philosophical greenhorn. I knew Master's teachings backwards and forwards. I've been teaching them and working on them and writing them and everything all my life, 54 years now. But it didn't add up. It was not logical. It was not deep. It was superficial. He was saying that everybody in the world, this was his supposed discovery, wants to escape suffering and find happiness. Well, to begin with, wants to escape pain and find happiness, but we'll say, to shortcut it, suffering and happiness. Well, so what else is new? Every life form tries to escape pain and find at least pleasure. You can train a worm to choose the right passage to walk, or whatever his worms do, slither, by delivering a little bit of electric shock, and it can learn. They have discovered that even as primitive as a worm is, it can learn finally not to go this way, but to go this way. Pain. It's the old principle of you want to avoid pain and find that which pleases. It's the way life teaches all. It's not a great discovery to say that this is what man wants. Then the next thing that he didn't do, and it was a puzzler to me how to work this out. What Master really was trying to say is that life, mankind especially, because animals don't seek happiness so much as pleasure. Man, when he's on a lower level, wants pleasure. But as he advances more, he discovers that what he wants is happiness, which is independent of anything physical. You can be happy even when nothing's going right. In fact, one of the songs that I wrote, there's Joy in the Heavens, you know that song. And I was driving through a blinding rainstorm one day. I had an appointment and I was worried about being late, but I could hardly see 50 yards down the freeway. And I was feeling, as I said, frustrated when I thought, well, what's the point in getting frustrated? The rain's there anyway. So I said, if I can't have decent weather outside, I'm going to create my own good weather inside. And as soon as I thought that, this song came to me. There's joy in the heavens, a smile on the mountains. It's a nice song. And fortunately, there were no cops there to stop me from driving erratically, which I probably did. I wrote the thing down on a piece of paper as I was trying to, but I didn't want to lose that thing. Well, here I was. Nothing outwardly was making me happy. I made myself happy. You've all done that. We don't have to depend on outer circumstances. And so, yes, we want happiness. But the point Master was coming to was this, that what we're really looking for is bliss. Now, there's a real subtle tie between happiness and bliss. But dear Ananda didn't do it. Master tried to get him to do it, but it didn't come through. You thought, okay, so we want to be happy. What's that got to do with God? Master was trying to show how what we really want, all of us, all human beings, they're not seeking a cosmic ground of being. They're not seeking an almighty, omnipotence, omniscient, whatever. They want something specific, and everybody in the world, even though he doesn't define it as God, he wants happiness. He wants to escape suffering, and he wants to find bliss. But he doesn't know that that's what he wants. He thinks it's happiness. Well, to tie these two together and to help to help people to understand that happiness is just as an animal, an animal can really know of bliss is pleasure. They may get glimmerings of happiness, but they certainly don't know bliss. And many human beings get glimmerings of happiness, but they don't know bliss. And yet, that is what they all want, and they're looking for it in things, and it's only until they understand that what they're looking for is an abstraction and not to be found in things, and that what things give you, you see these ads of people at a party drinking Coca-Cola, let's say. Everybody's smiling, and you're supposed to get the message that by drinking Coca-Cola, you're going to get happy. Well, you know that's not true. I'm sure just as many people have drunk Coca-Cola in solitary gloom. Has nothing to do with you. You make yourself happy. And so this line of development needed to be developed, and dear Ananda didn't succeed in that. He used illustrations that were trivial. I ended up having to drop, I think, all of his illustrations. They weren't Master's, and they didn't fit the teachings properly. They were either trivial, not sufficiently logical, didn't take you far enough, didn't work. And so, as I went into this book more and more, and believe me, I did it extremely conscientiously, and I was really meditating. I felt Master's guidance in this. But it was all things he said. I've heard him say them. It's that dear Ananda wasn't enough in tune. In fact, dear Ananda wasn't in tune, period. He ended up betraying Master, doing his best to encompass his financial ruin. He was one of the major tests in Master's life. You remember in Autobiography of a Yogi when Sri Yukteswar expressed disapproval of Master when he was a young man to Master's father? Remember that story? And Master wrote, "The only reason for my Guru's displeasure at that time was that I had been trying to draw a certain person to this path, and he was trying to discourage me from doing so." That was all. Dear Ananda was that person. And it's the play of the Masters in their lives. It's all a divine play. Sri Yukteswar knew Master had to do it. Master knew Sri Yukteswar was right. He told Margaret Lancaster he told Tulsi Bose, who told Margaret Lancaster when they were boys together. He said someday, dear Ananda, whose name at that time was Bakshi, he said someday he'll betray me and marry a white woman. He knew it all. It's sort of like you go to a movie. You don't want to have to think about now the villain comes. No, let it be a shock. Let the surprises happen. It's more interesting. There was a movie I went to years ago, and there was one of these girls in the crowd, these absolute pills, who everything, she just wanted to show that she knew. So everything, before it happened, she would tell you what was going to happen. But you couldn't enjoy the darn thing. And you just wish she'd shut up and let the surprise take place. Well, so it was with Master. He knew what was ahead of him, but he had to do that. This was a disciple who had betrayed him in the past. In fact, another very interesting thing, I don't suppose any of you haven't heard by now that Master told us he was William the Conqueror. Intriguing fact. I grew up with an English education thinking of William the Conqueror as one of the great villains of history. Here I find out he's my own guru. It's a very interesting thing. You know that prayer of St. Francis, "Make me an instrument of thy peace"? You all have heard that. Well, even the Vatican now is admitting that it wasn't written by St. Francis. And you know who did write it? William the Conqueror. Isn't that astounding? But how would William the Conqueror, as English history tells us about him, write a poem like that? He didn't come as an instrument of peace, but yet he did. History, as Napoleon used to say, is a lie agreed upon. And William the Conqueror had to do a certain job, and he had to use the appropriate methods. It's just the way things are in this world. But he was a great man. His son, Robert, who became the Duke of Normandy after William died, he betrayed Henry constantly. And that Robert was dear Ananda. So you see these constant ties in. It's a fascinating story. It's not something I'm intending to get into today, but to help you to see what a broad panorama we live in. You think of a lifetime as a long time. You look at me and you might think, well, he's an old man. I'm not at all old. I'm me. I'm not young, I'm not old, I'm just me. And that's the same thing for all of you. There was something in Master's interpretation, comments on the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, in which he was explaining that what Omar Khayyam was really saying was that many souls that are born at the beginning of a day of Brahma are still in delusion at the end of a day of Brahma. And it raises the question, well, how many days of Brahma, for God's sake, are you going through? One day of Brahma lasts billions of years. And yet you think of a person in one lifetime who has one little thing he's trying to overcome. He may succeed, But that one little thing isn't by any means fulfilling the saying of Jesus, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which was in heaven is perfect." We've got a long way to go to become perfect. Somebody said to Master, Norman said to him, well, he tended toward the gloomy view, and he said to Master, "Sir, I don't think I have very good karma." Master looked at him very sternly. He said, "Remember this, it takes very, very, very good karma even to want to know God." That means you all have that kind of karma too. You would not be on the path if you hadn't been struggling and bumping up against furniture in the dark for a long time. Don't get discouraged because you're almost out of it when you reach that point of wanting God. That's why they say that one moment in the company of a saint can be your raft over the ocean of delusion. Why? Because a saint can touch your heart, can touch your soul, can awaken. The printer at Mount Washington, his name was Orville Anders. He ended up taking over Divorce Publishing. And he wasn't on the path at all, and he used to sort of laugh about what we were doing with meditating and so on. Then he began to ask a few questions, and with the questions, he began to probe a little more. And when Master saw that he was really wanting to know, one time Master called him up and had a talk with him, and he took him by the head and looked into his eyes like that, just for quite a little while. And Orville afterwards said he was just dizzy, but it changed his life. From then on, he became a devotee. It's a tremendous blessing to be that. And even if you can sow that seed in somebody, it may take a long time before that seed finally sprouts into a tree. And God knows even trees take a long time to grow. I remember saying to Master one time, "Have I been your disciple for thousands of years?" Somebody had a vision that made me sort of scared at that thought. All that Master said was, "It's been a long time, that's all I'll say." It doesn't mean that once you're on the path, well, 1 or 2 lifetimes and that's it. But at least you're on the path and you can get out in 1 or 2 lifetimes. You can get out in this lifetime. But don't think that it's going to be done by putting your feet up on the table and reading the sports. It comes by work, hard work. But even the intention is important. Even the desire is essential. And so when you see somebody like dear Ananda, who was Master's disciple and yet betrayed him, that happens, you know. Master told the story about a saint living as a hermit in a little hermitage. And he had a little pet mouse. And this pet mouse kept running to him for protection because there was a cat there that wanted to grab the mouse. And finally the saint said, "Well, I'm tired of protecting you, be a cat." And suddenly the mouse found itself as a cat, and it was able to defend itself. But then there was a big mastiff in the area, and seeing this cat, and so he began to make life miserable for this poor little cat. He'd been ignoring it as a mouse. And so finally this mouse cat, sort of understanding the history so far, sort of looked pleading at the master. And the master said, all right, I'll make you a dog." Well, this wasn't enough because there were wild animals in the area, and tigers and leopards and elephants and so on. And this poor dog was quite worried about the surrounding tigers. So finally, the master said, "Be a tiger." And suddenly, this mouse tiger found itself a tiger, in fact. And all the people who came were afraid of this tiger. And people who were in the know said, "Oh, don't worry, it's just a mouse." And the tiger began to get very offended. It thought it wanted the full dignity of a tiger and not to be thought of as just a mouse. And so finally one day, it sprang at the master, thinking, if I can just get rid of this embarrassment, then I can be a genuine tiger. And he leapt in the air and fell down as a little mouse went squeaking off. And so Master told that story to say that when you come to a master, he gives you power. And that power makes you strong, of course. But if you begin taking it to yourself and thinking, I'm the one who did it, I'm the one who's powerful, then you fall again. And the path is one of going up and down until you learn your lesson. So what happened with dear Ananda was that he did develop a certain amount of power and began to think, well, I don't need that guru, I'm the one. And so there developed what happens. You see it with Judas. You see it in the life of, I suppose, probably every master. This is just one of the temptations that disciples can quite logically and easily, it's easy to understand, fall into, isn't it? And so dear Ananda fell into that. And in this lifetime also, he was full of envy and jealousy and opposition and so on. And so he had to, one time he actually struck Master in public. He was paralyzed in that hand for 6 months, I'm told. But Master said he was very accepting of people as they were. He knew they had to go through their delusions. He said he'll be liberated in 2 lifetimes, or did he say 3? That's not much, believe me. 3 lifetimes out of billions? Just think of the usual Christian dogma. Somebody, let's say a teenager, commits a crime, and because of having committed a crime, and let's say he gets shot by the police and dies before he's 20, and he goes to the other place, obviously, according to Christian dogma. And there he is in hell. Now, mind you, eternity, to the average mentality, what does it mean? Well, you live 70 years, 80 years, maximum 90, 100. Eternity, 1,000 comes pretty close to eternity, doesn't it? 1,000. There isn't any time in eternity. Days and nights of Brahma, billions and billions of years are just a blink in the eye of eternity. There isn't any time. And so, let's say that this boy is in hell for all eternity, according to Christian dogma. And 1,000 years pass, and 1,000,000 years passed, and that's a long time, isn't it? If you're thinking in time. And then let's say a couple of billion years down the road, a fellow inmate says to him, well, say, John, what are you down here for? I can imagine John replying, well, gosh, I don't really remember. I mean, what happened when I was 17 years old, now that I'm 2 billion years old, it wouldn't have any meaning. There's no such thing as eternal hell. But it seems like eternity. When you're suffering, it seems as if it'll never end. That's why they speak of eternal hell. But sooner or later, you have to go through all these experiences in order to learn, in order to come to that point. But to reach that, to be passing through incarnation after incarnation, you have a heavy responsibility, a serious one. Don't take it too lightly. Because if you don't know, there was one disciple of Master, Mr. Cuaron. He was the center leader in Mexico City. Huge fellow. I remember when he first came to Mount Washington while I was there, first of all, somebody brought the bags in, and there was this one huge bag that was sort of floppy and fat and so on, and dumped it there. And I thought, well, I wonder whose that is. And somebody suddenly spoke from above me, that's mine. And I looked up, and he looked just like his bag. But he was a wonderful person, and very devoted. And Master said to him one time, I lost sight of you for 2 or 3 lifetimes, but now you're back. I won't lose sight again. Won't lose touch again. And every now and then, Mr. Quadron would say, you remember your promise? Master said, I remember, I won't lose touch with you. But mind you, we go through lots of experiences. One lifetime, poof, it's gone. Here I am, I'll be 77 this month. That's nothing. Seems like a lot? No. And I look back to when I was 4, I have a very good memory. And I can remember, I could have filled a book the size of the path with the things that happened before I was 10. And those things are just as real to me now. I remember songs, speeches, things that people said, things that people did. It's a selective memory, of course. Everybody remembers the things that he's interested in. But the thing is that it's just as real to me today as it was then. Time doesn't really mean anything. And so, don't waste that time. It will seem sometimes like hard work. It's not. It's just a joy. The more you give yourself to it, the more you find, this I can tell you from experience, you find yourself happier and happier. That nothing seems to bother you anymore. No matter how many things go wrong, you just let it be, doesn't matter. Because you're happy in yourself. When I dream at night, I never have anything, but I'm just the same fellow. I never have nightmares or things I'm afraid of or anything. It's just life, I don't mind. But it's a nice state to reach where you can accept whatever happens, and if some dreadful thing is looming, you just think, well, okay, let it loom. It's all. Nothing can touch who you really are. The more you meditate, the more you come to that point where you know that who you really are is who you really are, and nothing else is. You are your reality. And how people treat you, how people think of you, what people do to you, none of that really matters. And so, once we understand that, we begin to understand that I have to say it's a great book. Many people say it's my greatest book. Of course, it's not my book at all. But it is his teachings, and I really felt him teaching through me, writing through me. But it's all the things he said. I used very few illustrations that he didn't use himself. Sometimes I would, but very rarely. It's an exciting book. And I finished it, as I said, the night before I left on this trip. And what a joyful feeling it was. Anyway, we're going to work hard to get it out soon. And you're going to have to work fast, Sean, because it'll probably be out in Italian before it's out in English. Yeah, because Sahaja is working hard on translating, and she's right up almost to where I am. So, in fact, we're going to give it as if... Huh?
It'll be out very soon.
Yeah, good man. He's a wonderful director of our publishing department, just wonderful. What makes it wonderful is he wants to do God's will, and he wants to do it in God's way. This is very important. And then the book will be given as a free gift at the EBA in Los Angeles at the end of this month. So it'll be out, at least in that format. Not for sale, but soon after that. Anyway, this book takes it beyond that barrier, sort of like a sound barrier I had to break between happiness and bliss. Not an easy thing to manage, but I've done it. And that was a big one. To help you to understand how the one ineluctably leads to the other. That bliss is the only possible solution to what everybody wants. We don't want happiness, we only think we want happiness. All of us really want bliss. And to go into the nature of bliss and what bliss really is. These things have been tossed around and nobody's ever come to the point. And this book does that. So, as I say, I'm happy with it. In this book, there's a very interesting chapter. It's chapter 7. In fact, what happened was when I took a vacation, my brain, working on this book, it's almost as if my brain was in a vice sometimes. There was so much heavy thinking to get into, and I just had to break out of it for a while and rest this poor old cervello and my brain. And I left chapter 7 thinking, oh, it's done. When I came back, I thought, well, let me just read 7 and 8, which I had already done, and get sort of into the flow again before I go on to 9, 10, 11. There are 11 chapters in all. When I looked at 7 with a free mind, a rested mind, I was appalled at how much work it still needed. And I spent at least another month working on it. I'd like to just touch a little bit on that chapter. It's basically, it's religion and spirituality, but that also applies to organizations and the individual. And I think you're going to find it a very important chapter for the future of Ananda, because the tendency of every religious organization through history has been to want to go toward efficiency. It just happens. You've got a group of people trying to do a good thing, but in a sloppy way, and somebody comes along and starts hustling and saying, let's get efficient. And so everybody starts thinking, well, gee, we should. And before you know it, they're getting graphs. And I've been through it all. When Master passed away, I went to the desert and was there for a 2-week seclusion. And during that 2 weeks, I was in the correspondence department at the Mount Washington headquarters, in the office there. Letters used to come and sit around on people's desks for 2 months and more before they got answered. They'd get routed through the books department, the lessons department, and this department and that department, till finally they reached the correspondence department with this list of things that had already been accomplished, and then the letter could be answered. Meanwhile, the person may be dying. He may be having some desperate need, and still it doesn't get answered for 2 months. So I was thinking, and there was a friend of mine there, another monk, Andrew Sells, and we were talking about this with great excitement about how we need to reorganize the correspondence department. Well, in doing that, when we came back, and there was a lot of opposition from the office, but Rajarshi said yes, it should be done, so everybody said okay. Well, organizing the correspondence department depended upon organizing the lessons department, which depended upon organizing the books department, which depended upon reorganizing the accounting department, and maybe there were other departments involved. Each one depended on the other. Like the shin bone connected to the knee bone, and so on. And so I couldn't do this until I did that. I couldn't do that until I'd done that. And so it took me, instead of the 2 weeks that I'd expected, it took me 1.5 years. Well, in that organizational effort, all my thinking was how to make it simple so that people can work with a minimum of effort. What I found was that people were saying, oh, how wonderful that we're finally getting organized. And so organizing as a thing in itself became people's fascination. And hardly a week would pass where some new directive would appear on our board, and I began to feel as if I was suffocating. And the same thing happened with the centers. I was put in charge of the center department. And I tried to get a system going for the centers that would make them flow more together, but easily and harmoniously. I suggested outlines for them so they'd have at least something they could talk about on Sunday mornings and so on. I found that after I went to India, they were beginning to impose these outlines, and people not only followed an outline, it was all written. They had to read what was written. That's what they do today still. And the more and more I would try to get something organized with the view to make it simple, once it was moving, people would see the motion itself as the solution. And so they would do organizing for organizing's sake, not for the end purpose, with the result that I began to feel as if I was just suffocating. And it was really God's will that I be put out of the organization. In building Ananda, I have tried my best to have it a non-system thing. I don't believe in systems. I believe in goodwill. With the best will, you can make the worst system function. With no goodwill, you can ruin the best system. This is not something you can put on paper. You can't make a procedure book out of it. You can't tell people how it's got to be. Really, it can only be learned by osmosis. But this is what you see in the history of the churches, that people want to organize it. And what happens, of course, is that people who are efficient, if you've got, let's say, and this is something I mentioned in chapter 7, you've got a position to be filled. And it's a religious organization, so of course you want devotees. But supposing that position calls for efficiency also. I mean, there's not much point in having books sent out to the wrong addresses. It's not like Tukaram, who was a poet saint in India when he was a young man, was employed as an accountant. And his head and mind were in God, and he used to write spiritual poetry in the margins of his ledger book. Well, his boss fired him. In any organization, if you've got to do something, you've got to do it well. That's obvious. But now, supposing you want devotees, and you've got one person, so if you find a devotee who's also good at what you're looking for, fine, but don't count on it. You can't necessarily expect that. And so you've got somebody who's a devotee, but hopelessly impractical, or not really very good at this kind of work, and you have another one who is super efficient, but not much of a devotee. Whom are you going to choose? You're going to be forced by circumstances to choose, at least some of the time, the efficient one. Life doesn't give you an alternative. These are the realities. Okay, one or two cases, fine. But what happens is that efficiency begins to breed efficiency. You become in charge as an efficient person. What's your first thought? To draw other people who are like you. The tendency of efficient people will be to say, well, yeah, I know he's a saint, but what an accountant. And so they will naturally select people who are like them. What happens almost inescapably? Ashi, why don't you bring me some tea? Almost inescapably is, well, you go to Rome and look at the Vatican. These cardinals with red hats. Point a saint out to me among them. Oh, I mean, who can say he was a saint just by looking at him? But from their faces, from their manner, from their way of speaking, they're businessmen, CEOs. That's what happens. You can't help it, really. I don't think you can. But I'd love to break that system. I'd love to change it somehow. And I really worry that this is the biggest thing that can hurt Ananda's future, for us to become super efficient. Not that efficiency is wrong in itself, it's a good thing. You need efficiency. But the heart of it should be God. And if that begins to dilute, each little movement has its own momentum. And that movement toward dilution can become more and more, until finally what happens? The saints get persecuted. Isn't that what happens? There was an order, the Claretians in Los Angeles, and there was a priest there who even used to levitate. And people would come from parishes from all over to come to his Mass, take confession from him. Well, naturally, the other priests didn't like it. And naturally, they complained to the bishop. And naturally, the bishop was faced with this dilemma. On the one hand, can he, the bish, make saints out of all of these priests? Not so likely. So what's he going to do? The solution is to send him to Spain, that one priest, the embarrassment. What they do is they put them in prison, as they express it in the Catholic Church. They deliberately, and organizations deliberately dilute, mediocritize, lower the standards in order to make them available to everybody. Now, Ananda's an organization. Ananda's a wonderful organization. It's full of glowing souls. But what will make it glowing is if you keep that spirit. And if you don't fall into the trap of becoming systematized, efficient, and so on. We need to be efficient for God, sure. But for God, and put meditation first. Put love of God first. Nothing else matters. You're going to be gone just poof in a few minutes. I mean, I realize now, I don't plan to write any more music. I sit and listen to this music, and it thrills me. I never think of it as mine. I just thank God that it was given to me. People ask me, well, aren't you going to write more music? I don't think so. I might, but I doubt it. I just haven't many years to live, and I've got certain books to write, and they have to be done. I've said what I had to say in music. I haven't said everything I could say through books. And so I have to think in terms of the temporary nature of life. Most of you are a lot younger than I am in years, not in fact. There was a girl in the congregation here once who asked me, "How old are you?" I said, well, let's put it this way. When you were an old woman, I was your age. We come and we go, but you're pretty soon going to find that you're gasping that last breath. It'll all be gone. And all the things that you've built won't mean anything. But the relationship that you've built with God will be what you carry. That is your priority. Don't put it off. And as long as Ananda keeps that principle high, then it won't fall. There's another reason for thinking it won't fall. Plenty of reasons for thinking it will. History is pretty absolute on that point. It always does happen. But it doesn't have to. Why? Because we're in a new age. We're in an age when a higher energy is coming out. Not just material energy, spiritual energy. The people used to say, and I remember this one talk I had, look, I'm talking a long time, but I don't get to see you that often. It was the installation of Richard Baker as the Roshi of the San Francisco Zen temple, and he was a friend, so I was there. And later on, I was talking to a young woman, and we were just chatting, and after a while I asked her name, and she told me and said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Swami Kriyananda." "Oh, Kriyananda, but you're famous." I said, "Well, maybe, I don't know, but why do you use the word but?" And she said, "Well, all the other famous people I've met seem important." Well, I don't know if she was digging a hole deeper and deeper. But the truth is that I liked that. I felt it was a very high compliment, that you don't have to seem important. Self-important, I think, is what she was really saying. And the same thing with energy. There are higher kinds of energy. When I was young, nobody thought I was a leader. I was always sort of the one making things happen, but they didn't see it. Why? Because I didn't push myself forward. I didn't say, "Look at me, I'm the boss here, I'm making the decisions." But I made people want to do things, and somehow they all flowed well. So I've always been like that all my life. It's not something I had to learn, but I'm not a bossy kind of boss. I'm not a leader in that sense. I just inspire people to want to do it. Well, that's something that is a new kind of energy. It's what Master had. He never imposed his will, but he made you want to do things. And so that kind of energy, people are beginning to become aware of it. In the past, well, in the Shudra days, only muscle counted. Then money, finances count as you come up. But we're in an age now where subtler kinds of energy are perceptible, appreciated, understood. This kind of energy, if you bring that in, it will be far more powerful and far more effective than if you think, well, let's see, we got to organize, and how does IBM do it? How they do it is their problem. It won't work for us. Many people have come to Ananda thinking they have the solution. It worked in their world. It worked in their way. Here we are living in Silicon Valley where this kind of thinking is common. But it doesn't have to be. It's not the only way of doing things. And what you'll find is, then what we have found at Ananda, that when the will is right, somehow we learn how to do things in our way and they work. Well, I don't want to get into the technicalities of that. It would take me all night. But the point is that when your energy is right, this is what I've found with writing music, just as a simple example. You know, I never imagined myself as a composer. You think of somebody who does something like that and does it, I think, reasonably well, that he's obsessed with the desire to be that. I never even thought about it. I remember when I was 6, I had this dream in which little ducks came to the house dressed in sailor suits, and they were all singing, "It's time to go to school, it's time." And I still can see them dancing there. But you can't really pull that out as the mark of a future composer. I don't think. And yet, when it occurred to me to maybe that writing songs, because I studied singing and I sang the classical songs of Schubert and Bach and others, you know, Pergolesi and so on. But I didn't want to share that with people. What does that have to do with what we're all about? I knew that I could use my voice to reach people. I had been blessed with a voice that could sing well. But should I sing that song, "Oh, cessate di piagarmi, oh, lasciatemi morir"? What a message. Oh, stop bugging me and let me die. You know, listen, you know what the rock music says. Classical music is not much higher than that. The message is always the same. I loved her, she done me wrong, and I'm suffering. I thought, well, if I could sing songs, yeah, I could sing Master's chants. I could sing Indian bhajans. That's not going to wow the multitudes. And so I was just driving down from Yosemite when this thought came to me. I thought, well, maybe I could write songs that say our message. And maybe I could do that. And I said to Master, what do you think? And suddenly this song came. And I stopped at a milkshake stand and wrote it down on a paper napkin. And my brother had left a guitar at my parents' home, a Martin. And I thought, well, great. He let me keep it. I went out and got Pete Seeger's guitar, folk singer's guitar guide. I think that was the name. And so I bought this thing and started working at the guitar, and I'd played the piano before for years, but never the guitar. And I'd been working at the guitar for a month. Well, you know, it's not very long. I've said life is short. Well, a month is very short. When somebody asked me if I'd like to give a concert, and I thought, well, God, takes courage to live. I said, okay. it occurred to me that if I had to give a concert in a week, which is what the time was, I'd really have to practice, and that's what I needed to do, so this would force me. So I practiced hard for a week, and I wrote 2 or 3 other songs, and that night came, and it was 200 people, the hall was packed, and they wanted to create atmosphere. Completely darkened room. The only light in that blasted room was a candle on a mantelpiece behind me. I needed to see those strings. If anything else I needed in the world, it was to see those strings so I could hit the chords right. I mean, a month is not very long. And I know afterwards there was somebody from San Francisco State who said, you know, I'm a music major. Those were pretty interesting chords. Yeah, I'd missed most of them. But somehow it succeeded. I told stories and I sang Indian songs and sang my own songs to bad chords, but the songs were good. And so I got into it, but how? Always by asking. I never said, I want this melody to go this way. Sometimes a song would come to me that would be against what I was expecting. You know, Peace, you all know the song Peace. I think you like the song, I do. But it's not at all what I expected. I thought it would be a comic song. It was for this story that I wrote of somebody who had lost the note of A. And finally, with a long story I won't go into, he got that note of A back, and it was so beautiful that somebody even composed a song for him, Melody on A, which was the beginning of my fantasy. I wrote this when I was 18, because you can't write a melody on one note. You could write it in the key of A, but not just one note. And so I expected this to be a funny song. It didn't have that in mind at all for me. And the song that came out was very serious, and what gives it its variety is the rhythm and the chords. And it's a beautiful melody, although there's no melody. But again and again, sometimes 2 or 3 times, I've sat at the piano, I wanted a melody, and I've sat at the piano and I couldn't think of a melody. I said, well, God, show me what you want. And my fingers moved. And I just went with them, and a beautiful melody came out. This isn't my music. You'll see that the more you ask God to guide you, the more you offer yourself up to Him, not like automatic writing, and that wasn't that either. But the more you let His energy come in, the more you'll see you will be guided, and the things that you do will work. Now that's the kind of message we're bringing to the world. Communities, yes. Meditation, yes. But we're living in an age when we have to practicalize. We have to make our teachings practical. Manifesting money is one way. But manifesting anything you want to do is the way that God wants. Whatever you have to do, you should have the responsibility to do it well. But you will see that with His help, you can do it well. And with His help, you'll suddenly understand, oh yeah, of course this is how it is. Look, after 35 years of Ananda, I can say it with a lot of conviction. It has worked. And it will continue to work if you have that kind of faith. And you will have that kind of faith if you do 2 things. Meditate above all. Second, put these things into practice. Have the faith to launch off the high board. I remember when I was a little boy, unfortunately this scene was captured on film by my father. Never forgiven him. I was supposed to take my first dive. Well, my brother, he was very different from me. I was always I just wanted to make sure I was getting this right. My brother just sort of threw himself off the board, and that was that. But I went out to the tip of the end of the board and went back. I finally ended up jumping. No dive, a jump. It was embarrassing. But if you can really get that courage together, and I ended up really enjoying diving, and I was pretty good at diving. But if you don't ever allow fear to enter in, if you keep trying, you will see in time, that you can do anything you set your mind to, and that putting your energy into that, you can manifest success in all that you do. Now that's what Ananda is about too. Not just manifesting money, that's important. We're at a time in our history where we've got to manifest money. But manifest success, that's the real thing. Manifest well what you do, even if it's just working in a store. When people come to your store, there are two ways of treating them. Oh, here's a customer. The other, oh, here's a friend. What a difference those two attitudes make. What a difference attitude can make in anything that you do. So let your involvement in Ananda not be, well, somebody ought to do something about it. The typical attitude of the underling who doesn't do anything, expects it to be done for him. Ananda isn't trying to attract people that it will do things for. It's trying to attract a group of people who will do it together and with joy and with a sense of responsibility, and who won't allow anybody to say it's got to be this kind of thing or that kind of thing, but with joy, working together, putting out the energy to do as well as you can whatever it is that you are trying to do. I think that this is perhaps the most important message I can give you today. And because it's late, and I didn't really expect to talk so long, but I'm very glad to be here and very glad to share with you. Thank you.